All right, we are recording, and we will soon be live on Facebook.
Mr. Chairman, I think we can start whenever you're ready.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Ray Rickman, Chair of the Special Committee to commemorate works in public spaces in the city of Providence. We're going to have roll call. Identify myself as Ray Rickman, present. Can we start with April?
Present.
Eric?
Present.
Marco McWilliams?
Present.
So these are the members, and then we have two ex officio members, if they would identify themselves.
I am Stephanie Fortunato, Director of Providence's Department of Art, Culture, and Tourism.
I'm Caleb Horton, Providence City Archivist.
And we are going to do a quick overview of the process. And again, at any point, if members have any comments, please weigh in. And then if individuals who are part of this Zoom viewing or planning to participate, there'll be a time in which you can raise questions as well. We want to have as open a process, as informative a process as humanly possible, in spite of Zoom. So, the first item will be introduced by the city archivist in terms of giving a short briefing on it. And then when we come to the second item, and there are only two items officially on the agenda today, again, the city archivist will do the same. We'll open the process by briefing us all, including all of the members of the public. And then individuals will be able to share their rationale for proposed action on the issue. So, for instance, if we're talking about Christopher Columbus statue, individuals be able to weigh in at that point. The public comment, each member of the public wishing to comment must raise their hand so that we can identify you and again state your name. And members of the public should be brief and stick to the 1 minute or so. If you run a little over, we'll of course let that happen. And the truth be known, if during the course of the conversation you hear something and you want to respond again, you may do that later. So we're going to ask commentators to refrain from reiterating points made by others. And we want to, again, be rather liberal about what that means. If you just want to weigh in and say hi, for whatever reason, we're really nice people and we'll let you do that. So that's basically the public process. And then the committee will discuss the proposal, the official proposal before us. And then I, the chair, will call for recommendation action. And again, just for your knowledge, the committee makes a recommendation to the governing body For instance, the Parks Department in regards to Christopher Columbus, just to give an example. At other times, it may be Public Works or some other entity of the Providence city government that controls the site or the project that we're talking about. This is a recommendation, and then the governing body will make the decision. Again, I hope that's rather clear. We have staff from city clerk's office and from Arts and Tourism who will be doing most of the staff work. And we're going to hear from Stephanie. And well, Stephanie, will you start the conversation in regards to guidelines? We're calling them rubrics that we're following. Every institution has guidelines, rules, regulations that they follow in order not to be scattered and in order to support their decision. And we too have that. And Stephanie will talk, open conversation right now with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, so just so members of the public who might be tuning in for this are aware, each of the panelists have been provided with a rubric with which to evaluate the applications that have been received to date. And that rubric is really meant to provide guidance on thinking about the variety of issues that need to be considered when making a recommendation about these existing commemorative works. And while we don't have them on the agenda today, at some point we may be reviewing new proposals for commemorations. And so the questions are meant to guide the panelists in their thinking and in their review, and to provide a point of reference for that recommendation that will be made to the body who is responsible for the commemorative work. And as a reminder, those bodies may change depending on where the commemorative work is cited. So for example, Christopher Columbus is in a public park, and so the recommendation will be provided to the Board of Parks Commissioner, who then will have to review that recommendation to make a decision. But the rubric itself was created again alongside the development of this committee. And it's really meant to outline 5 particular aspects of the commemoration. The relevance to the local community and the public life and the public space itself, measures of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the complexity that the work of art represents or the commemorative work represents, and then questions about siting, design, and conservation. So the full rationale for each of those evaluative measures is available at artculturetourism.com. If you go to the commemorative works page there, you can find the eligibility criteria, and that is provided alongside the application materials to everyone who has submitted a proposal. So they were aware of this eligibility criteria when they made their applications to the city of Providence. And I'm just going to ask Micah if there's anything else you think we should share about the rubric.
The rubric is linked in the chat, so you can go right to the Commemorative Works subsite and see the very categories and the very kind of like different levels, 1 to 5 scale, how each category is enumerated. So that should hopefully help you follow along in terms of how people on the committee are thinking about responding to these requests.
And Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to, could we take a minute? Is there any discussion among the committee members about that rubric or questions before we begin the meeting? This might be an appropriate time to talk about that.
Well, we all read it earlier, I hope. And again, if anyone has questions or comments, please speak up.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I just have one comment about the roll call. I believe I didn't hear my name, so I just wanted to state it for the record, Rebecca Davis.
Okay. You are here.
Thank you.
I had one comment about the rubric, which I thought, worked really well and was, well put together, well thought out. I do think a lot of my answers as I was scoring it really depended on where a commemorative work would be moved, and what the new setting would be, what the new context would be. And if we don't know for sure what would happen with a commemorative work, it's rather difficult to figure out, how to score those things. And so I think, we don't have to depend on how the rubric is scored, certainly, to make our decisions, and that's good. But I do think that's something that we might want to look at some point as we maybe refine this process, is how do we make a determination about what will happen in the future when we don't really know what will happen in the future. And so I thought that was the one, I don't want to say issue I had with it, because it's not really that, but it's one, I don't know, one thing I thought we might want to look at some point again.
So, that is always an interesting problem. When I was in the legislature, I used to vote against bills because they wouldn't give the public enough time to make adjustments. They'd say this takes effect upon a passage, and I'd vote no every time. You have to give people 60 days, 90, 5 years to change what they're doing. And, I just would remind us all, you don't know what tomorrow brings, even if you had the 7 steps in place. And in most cases, you only have 5 steps or 4 steps. But I think we should discuss this, because it may be that we may have to take issue up again. Our decision wouldn't be final, because as it moves forward, it doesn't work the way we thought. That's just my quick reflection on that. Anyone else?
If I could just respond too quickly, I appreciate that comment. And I just, as a reminder, right, this is new work for the city of Providence, and we are together entering into a new endeavor here. And the structures that we create and use, we want them to be such that generations ahead of us will be able to revisit these decisions that we have made, and understand why we made them. So yeah, I think refinement, adaptation, modification, to the process itself will be a natural course that happens throughout this, since, as we've built it on paper, but now we're actually testing it in process here. But transparency is important.
We're going to go to the city archivist to discuss item number 1, Thomas J. Waters Memorial Square in Pleasant Valley Parkway.
So I'll start with a briefing. The square was dedicated under the auspices of the Thomas J. Waters Post, VFW, by a committee headed by the department commander and city councilman David Durgan. Thomas J. Waters was born in Mount Pleasant in 1896 and was well-known in amateur baseball circles before the outbreak of World War I. He enlisted in service on October 20th, 1917, and reached France February 21st, 1918. He was wounded in action during the Argonne Offensive and died October 2nd, 1918. His body now rests in the St. Michael's Cemetery. The square is bounded by Raymond, Arol, Orms, and Valley Street, and was approved by the City Council in the Board of Aldermen on September 15th, 1932.
Brief and to the point.
Yeah.
We'll now, pardon me?
Yeah, exactly. There's not a whole lot of information on him, unfortunately.
No, but
we'd like to dive into more.
As you know more than anyone, these honorary actions are not only for the person, but probably for all who fought in the war. So it's really fabulous when you think about it. We're going to hear from the Department of Planning, Martina Haggerty.
So And Micah, Martina has some slides to share. I want to.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. I'm going to see if I can share my screen here. So bear with me for a second.
Martina, I just made you a co-host, so you should be able to.
Yep, it looks like I can. Make sure I share the right screen here. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Okay, great. Anyway, my name is Martina.
Yes.
Director of Special Projects in the city's planning department, and we are in the midst of planning some roadway modifications to this section of roadway that is technically called Pleasant Valley Parkway, but often referred to as an extension of Dean Street. For reference, the area that we're talking about is this section of roadway between Promenade Street and the Woonasquatucket River to the south and Smith Street to the north, in the proximity of Davis Park. And more specifically, the location we're talking about is this traffic island located here on the screen. I've circled the location of the monument in red here. And just a few street views so you can kind of see the context of where the monument is located on this median. And the roadway modifications that we are planning for this coming summer involve shifting the curb line of that median over by several feet, which contradicts with the location of that existing monument stone. And so what we are proposing to this group is that the monument be relocated as part of our construction project diagonally across the street to this sort of extension of Davis Park here. If I can flip back a few slides, you can see here there's this sort of existing path that extends from Davis Park, which is located just north of here. We're planning some modifications to that footpath to widen it just a bit and have it interact with this intersection in a safer way. And so we propose relocating the monument there where it can be seen and it won't be located on a sad, lonely traffic island that's very difficult to get to by foot. And so this is that area, what it looks like today, and then a very crude rendering of what that area would look like in the future with the potential location for the monument located there. I'm happy to answer any questions folks might have about this, but I will mute myself otherwise.
Does anyone have questions? You know, I drove by the other day. I've seen this monument 50 times, but I pay no attention to it. Many monuments are like that, sadly. And you're absolutely right, because you're moving. When you get to that corner, you got to get through the light and get across. And so those who see it probably will pay more attention to it. Anyone else have thoughts or questions?
I would just add that, you know, I use that intersection a lot on my bicycle, and it's a terrible intersection. And
Yeah.
so any improvements are welcome. And, you know, moving the monument in this way seems like a really good idea.
Mhm.
I have questions about who will maintain the monument, and also are there any proposed structural changes or landscaping changes once the monument structure is moved to the new site?
I believe, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, other city folks. I believe it is maintained by the Parks Department currently and would continue to be maintained by the Parks Department upon its relocation there. I believe they maintain those grassy median islands now and also maintain that new location where we would plan to relocate it. There aren't any other landscaping modifications proposed other than the shift of the path that I had described. That area otherwise would remain sort of grassy. However, you know, in the future could accommodate additional landscaping elements such as shrubbery or plants and things like that.
Caleb,
Yes.
do you have any, there's no reason that you know of family?
From what I've researched, no.
Okay. Fine. So, Micah, will you see if public has any comments?
Yes, if the public attendees would be interested in speaking on this at all, please do raise your hand in Zoom and we will recognize you. Scrolling, do not see anyone raising their hand. You can also chat directly to indicate if you are raising your hand and we don't see you. I'm going to call a second time. If anybody from the public has comment, please raise your hand in the Zoom or chat us to indicate your interest. And one third and final time, anybody from the public wants to comment on item 1, the request for relocation of the Thomas J. Waters Memorial Square marker on Pleasant Valley Parkway, aka Dean Street. Please raise your hand or indicate otherwise that you would like to talk.
Okay. So we will ask for comments, additional comments from members of the committee and a recommendation.
One sort of comment or question that I had was if the monument is currently used for the site of any sort of ritual, or I saw that it was established by the veterans of foreign wars. So if there are any celebrations or wreath laying activities that happen there, and if so, if that could be, the comment is, could that be a consideration when moving it and thinking about landscaping in the new site?
Are you leaning towards asking the either Parks Department or Planning to think about enhancing with landscaping the monument?
If, as I mentioned, if it's used for any sort of community use or community ritual.
So the wild guess would be no. You know, I always hate to say this. My guess is that's a piece of no man's land. And my guess is, which happens to monuments quite often, is when you're talking 100 years out, the family has lost interest or moved away, and you know, the military all, those groups all gather at Memorial Park when they do gather. I've been an advocate on protecting World War I monument there, memorial, for 20 years. And I've had about 20 fights with skateboarders and Lord knows who else. And I haven't been able to get support because the groups are dormant. And so we're talking about the biggest, tallest monument in the city. And it's the wrong war. And I worry all the time about World War II, about that happening. I'm not a very militaristic man, but I'm very big on World War I and II monuments. And the Korean War monument I've adopted for 25 years. I clean it, beer bottles every Monday morning. You know, I'm talking long, but I'm just telling you, I think there isn't much. Now, maybe some vegetation would attract the eye, and that's the purpose we could serve, is that we could get people to slow down and look. So if you're recommending that both Parks and Planning look at enhancing the monument in some way when it's moved to, I don't want to put any words in your mouth, but it sounded like that's what you're saying. Now, here's this fabulous moment and it wouldn't cost much.
I agree. I believe I am saying that. I also think that it's a nice opportunity, given that this was a private and, you know, an individual that is not likely honored in any other way. to have some sort of contextual information there about who he was as a person. I thought that it was really wonderful, to hear about his involvement in baseball. So yeah, putting a face or a life behind the structure might make it more enticing for folks to engage with it.
Would you make a recommendation? I think our formal role here is to confirm or not confirm that it should be moved. And I think you're suggesting that when it is moved, that it be enhanced in some way with plannings or more, so that it's more prominent.
Yes, so I'm making a recommendation that I don't want to jump ahead, but yes, in addition to what I will vote on at the end of this, I want to make the recommendation that these thoughts are taken into consideration.
Okay. Micah, can you fashion that into?
Yes, I am taking notes that I can share with Martina and her team.
Okay. And I'm going to volunteer, Caleb, I'm going to volunteer that we can talk to one of the military groups and see if, when it is moved, that we might have an event.
We did do an event. I organized an event back in 2017 with the LaFazia Square. I had a World War I reenactor show up. He played taps. I had a speech. I had someone do a speech. I did additional research, and we did find family members. I'd like to do the same for Mr. Waters, if that's possible. So I can certainly help organize that.
Okay, I'll be your lieutenant.
Sounds great. I also have connections with the Varnum Continental Museum too. I can reach out to them. They're a great resource as well.
Oh yeah, they love this.
Yeah. Yep.
So are we set? Micah, I'm going to depend on you. Would you read the motion, leaving the additional back and forth between the archivist and I out of the motion?
So I think somebody needs to formally make a motion. So maybe just formally call for one, and then someone on the committee can make a formal motion to approve or not the
Okay.
recommendation for.
I was trying to take.
What I'm hearing as the recommendation is for relocation with a modification by enhancing the installation with interpretation.
Correct, made by Becky Davis. Do we have a second?
A second.
Second by April Brown. Any further discussion? So I guess we'll just run, just because it's our first action. Can we have April, can we have a yes? You made the motion.
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Becky,
Yes.
Marco,
Sorry, my mute was fighting with me. Yes.
oh, okay, at the very wrong moment. See, I have my problems in the beginning, get them out the way. Can we have a vote? Can we have your support of this motion, or?
Confirm support.
Okay, the vote is 5-0, and it has, it's the recommendation that will be sent to to the planning department. If there's no further discussion, we will move to item number 2. And that is the request for removal. Pardon me? Someone had a comment?
No, I was speaking out of turn. Sorry, just saying goodbye. to
Okay,
Alice.
we're talking about the Columbus statue at the Reserve Triangle. And we're going to have the city archivist give us a brief report.
All right, so I'll start with my briefing. In 1893, the original Columbus statue was unveiled at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Designed by Frederick Bartholdi, the famed French sculptor of the Statue of Liberty, the Columbus sculpture was shipped across the Atlantic and cast from 30,000 ounces of sterling silver at the Gorham plant, once situated by Mashpog Pond in Providence, Rhode Island. The company wanted to present a piece at the exposition that would catch its spectators' eyes and demonstrate its casting and design skills. It was no coincidence that Christopher Columbus was the chosen subject for its showpiece. Despite the fact that it opened May 1st, 1893 and closed October 30th, 1893, the Columbian Exposition celebrated the 400th anniversary of Columbus's arrival in America in 1492. For the most part, it showcased themes in American technological and cultural development. The nations of the world also shared their contributions to human civilization. Hosting the exposition was an opportunity for the United States to promote American society and progress during the midst of a significant sea change in the nation's history. It coincided with the nation's Gilded Age, its taming of the West, and the opening of a new frontier of manifest destiny on the international stage. Controversy arose at the exposition over racist depictions and celebratory themes there that depicted its many Native performers as showpieces and trophies. African Americans were barred from participation and faced discrimination too. Frederick Douglass co-authored a pamphlet titled "The Reason Why the Colored American is Not in the World's Columbia's Exposition Fair" in protest. The exposition did feature one day for African Americans designated as American Colored Day, in which Douglass was invited and spoke of, quote, the Negro problem in America. On October 3rd, 1893, the Columbus statue was recast in bronze by the Gorham Manufacturing Company from the original Bartholdi sculpture. The piece was never intended to be permanent. It was an advertisement for the exposition. It was too impractical to keep such an expensive and fragile work otherwise, and eventually it was melted down to be repurposed for silverware and other production line products. However, the silver cast sculpture was displayed briefly at Providence City Hall in December 1893 after the exposition. Several people were allowed to witness the casting at the invitation of the company. Part of the impetus for the recast may have been Bartholdi's visit to Newport during that year, but is not substantiated as to whether he collaborated in the recasting. Around 16,000 pounds of molten bronze were poured to manufacture the piece. Gorham intended to present the statue to the city as a memorial of the Columbian Year in celebration and the successful issue of the magnificent silver statue that brought fame to the city as well as the silversmiths, quote. But the city of Providence needed to consider its options before accepting the acquisition. This Providence City Council had passed a resolution in June of 1893 to consider the Dexter Training Field as a permanent home for the monument in a joint special committee. However, the Elmwood Association, a civic group from the residential neighborhood near the Gorham plant, took the initiative. Having already raised the funds for the statue's purchase, they proposed to place the figure between the reservoir and Elmwood Avenue. The city considered the Elmwood Association's plan under the conditions that the association, quote, guarantee of a sufficient amount to assure the bronze statue for the city, end quote. The association agreed and gifted the statue to the city to place it in their proposed location. A Mr. Joseph J. Cook, the first contributor to the subscription fund, quote, most earnest advocate of the Elmwood plan, end quote, presented to the city plans for a park to hold the statue and naming it Columbus Square after the statue. The unveiling ceremony began on November 8th, 1893. A procession formed the Elmwood Clubhouse at the corner of Burnett Street and Elmwood Ave under the escort of Reeves American Band and a chorus of 300 children from the Elmwood, Grammar, and Point Street School. A platoon of police from the 7th Station belonging to a precinct from the neighborhood also participated in the march. The procession stopped at Reservoir Avenue's junction, and a representative from the Gorham Manufacturing and Professor Alonzo Williams, a Brown professor, presented the piece to Mayor William Knight Potter. He graciously accepted it on behalf of the city at 2:30 p.m. Soon followed the musical composition Columbus, sung by the school children, and an oration by H.W. Rugg, a Universalist reverend, I believe. We may congratulate I'll start with this quote here. We may congratulate ourselves, I think, in the community as well on the erection of this beautiful statue, which is to stand here at the parting of the ways. We may rejoice the public spirit of the residents of Elmwood as signified by their procuring the memorial here placed. We may be glad and grateful also that this Columbus statue is a home production, end quote. This was followed by a lengthy oration on the merits of art and public spaces that remind the public of historical figures who, quote, merited the honor paid to them, end quote, and concluded that the statue, quote, stands on the conspicuous site to be a witness of things that uplift and clear the hearts of men and to be an inspiring object lesson for years to come, end quote. The oration concluded with a singing of America and My Country 'Tis of Thee by all attending. Among some of the participants were Governor D. Russell Brown, former Rhode Island Governors Royal Chapin Taft, Sr., and John William Davis, as well as government officials from the city of Providence and representatives from Durham. During the evening, there was a quote, there was a general illumination of residences in Elmwood, and there was also a copious display of flags and lanterns and red fire, end quote. Since its removal in June 2020, the Columbus statue remains in good condition. It once stood on its pedestal, a total of 6 foot 8 inches tall, which remains at Columbus Park. According to the Providence Parks Department, the figure is stored for safekeeping. Its value remains to be officially appraised. A brief literal description would describe the figure's pose as Columbus on Santa Maria's vow with his arm and index finger extended, metaphorically pointing to the New World. At the figure's right side, a rope anchor is coiled by his foot, emphasizing his nautical and exploratory prowess. The figure's base comprises westerly Rhode Island granite with the numerals 1492 on its right side and 1893 on its left. The park where the statue had stood remains named Columbus Square, but the landscape there has changed both demographically and in terms of physical characteristics. In October 2001, the statue was officially recorded in the National Register of Historic Places. The report accompanying its recording states that, quote, while the Columbus retains integrity of location, its setting has changed over time. The significance of the work is not dependent upon its setting, but is encompassed within the object itself, end quote. This representative piece of Christopher Columbus, displayed in the public square, is steeped in controversy. This will be communicated in additional supplementary materials alongside this briefing. 128 years after its fabrication, the arguments the statue invokes today are no different than those expressed by the participants and the marginalized spectators of the World's Columbian Exposition. That said, this commemorative work does embody an element of enduring historical value to the standards of the resources provided in this report. Beginning with its connection with the residents of Elmwood of the 19th century and as a masterwork by artist Bertoldi, it also remains a testament to the highly skilled metallurgy produced during the apex of the Gorham Manufacturing Company during the height of Providence's famed jewelry industry at the turn of the 20th century, a period that marked the city's place as the largest industrial metropolis in the United States per capita and boasted with the 5 industrial wonders of the world. The Providence City Archives' mission is to collect, preserve, and make our collections available equitably to our patrons. It's up to our representatives, the board, and the public, and the community to take the information our office and the Department of Arts, Culture, and Tourism have submitted in this briefing and use them as a resource for their own decision-making. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to, with some help, I believe, from Micah, we're going to go to the first submitter's comments. How are we going to handle this, Micah? You're going to share the screen?
Ray, from what I understand, the submitters are not present. So I think, you know, if you think it's useful to share the screen, I can do that to show the comments. Is that how you'd like to share them with the public?
Yes. So the first one is no change, correct?
Correct. So I will bring up the first comment on the screen. or the first proposal rather. So just so people can see, this is from a person named Hilding Munson. And the rationale for recommendation is, during all my years living in Providence, I would get up early and go to Columbus Square to celebrate the founding of America. The band concerts, the speaking program, the schoolboy races, the amateur walking races, etc., and all at Columbus Square, Elmwood and Reservoir Ave. This is where the statue of Christopher Columbus should be, Columbus Square, as it has been for all of my years. And I want to note that that person no longer resides in Providence.
Okay, so that is the first, and it is for no change.
Correct.
And can you go to the second,
Sure thing.
formal?
The second formal proposal is from Elizabeth Kimsey. It is for deaccession and removal, and the rationale states, removing the Columbus statue was the right decision, and I would be upset if we decided to again honor and uplift this figure. I encourage the thoughtful review of all figures of violence in our public spaces, whether they be colonizers, slave owners, or perpetrators of other crimes against humanity. And
Okay,
for the record, that person is a Providence resident.
And then we have a third person.
Right, and this is from Wendy Klein, and it is for deaccession and removal. And the rationale actually is more of a proposal for an alternative memorial. So I think at this point, we haven't made a determination as to what we're doing with this memorial. So I think it's not so germane to think about this secondary proposal, but this was technically a proposal for deaccession and removal as well,
Okay.
without a stated rationale as such.
I thank you. We're now ready for public comment. And again, Micah, if you would facilitate.
Yep, and I'm going to try and get people as they raise their hands, although it's sort of difficult to see who is raising their hand necessarily. Okay, so I have David will be first, then Joey, and then Doug.
And it looks like someone named Dylan has their hand raised, Micah.
Dylan Peacock. Stephanie, are you able to handle the notes from here? If I work on the stack to make sure that we get everybody in and out?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so David, I'm going to try allowing you to talk rather than promoting you to panelist, and you will have about a minute. Just make sure you unmute.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, I had sent a letter to Micah and Caleb, and I sent it too late to be included in the packet that you have. So have you had a chance to share that with Chairman Rickman and the other commissioners?
I believe that has been shared with the chairman and with ACT staff, but it was not included in the official briefing. So feel free to speak to your letter.
Okay, I will speak to it, and I assume you'll be sharing it with them at a later time.
Definitely.
I know a lot of the conversation. First of all, my name is David Talon. I'm a resident of the neighborhood where the statue is located or was located. I'm the president of the Reservoir Triangle Neighborhood Association, which is the neighborhood where the statue was located and where it was constructed. I know a lot of the discussion you've had about the statue has been more to do with whether or not Columbus was a nice person, or whether he was woke, or whether he had anything offensive in his Twitter account or his Facebook page. I'm not going to talk about any of those things, but I want to talk about the statue itself. The Reservoir Triangle, like I say, Columbus Square is the gateway to the Reservoir Triangle. If you're driving on Elmwood Avenue heading south, and you come to the intersection there. You bear left, you're into the Elmwood neighborhood, and you bear right, you're heading into the Reservoir Triangle neighborhood. About 200 yards away from there is where the statue was actually constructed in the former Gorham manufacturing site, which was 30 acres in between Adelaide Avenue and Mashpog Pond. And it's significant because basically the Reservoir Triangle neighborhood exists because of the Gorham plant. Prior to 1890, this was basically open farmland. And then in 1890, Gorham built there. They hired thousands of people to create fancy silverware and, yes, to manufacture statues. And all those people needed a place to live. They had about 3,000 employees. So that's when all the first houses were built in my neighborhood along Reservoir Avenue and Adelaide and about 30 other side streets that are in the neighborhood. So basically, we owe our existence to the Gorham plant. And this statue, which was manufactured in the Gorham's plant, is kind of a monument to my neighborhood itself. So it has special meaning for us because of that reason. Unlike some of the other neighborhoods that have talked about being relocated to, whether it be Federal Hill or Johnston, or putting it in the basement of the museum at the Rhode Island School of Design, it doesn't have any special meaning to them, but it does have a lot of special meaning to my neighborhood because it represents the company that is responsible for my neighborhood existing. And so for that reason, I'm urging you to return the statue to Columbus Square in my neighborhood where it belongs and where it's appreciated by the neighbors who live here. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, David.
Would you stay with us just for a quick minute?
Yes,
You are, I just want to make sure you are aware of the violence, the near violence. You're aware of the large number of police that gathered on a given night to protect the statue.
I am, and I would certainly hope that the city, if it's returned there, will put up some cameras so they can identify anybody who's doing things like that. I know I see the other people that submitted letters to you. None of them are from that neighborhood where they have arrested people for doing vandalism to the statue. The most recent instance, they arrested 3 people, 2 of them from Massachusetts, and 1 school teacher who lived on Salina Street up in the north end of the city, total opposite end of the city from us. As far as anybody being caught, nobody from the actual neighborhood where the statue was located has been involved in any vandalism or protests or violence or anything else. So, while we welcome people from other sections of the city or the state visiting my neighborhood, we'd ask them to be respectful to the people who actually live in the neighborhood that values the statue.
Thank you very, very much.
Next, I'm going to promote Joey to allow you to talk. So just unmute yourself, Joey, when you are ready.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me a chance to make public comment. I'm just going to read some prepared notes that I have just because I want to make sure that I say everything that I want to say. My name is Joseph Gizzarelli. I'm a lifelong Providence resident. I created the petition to remove and relocate the Providence Columbus statue, which as of today's date has 2,755 signatures. Today, I speak for my petitioners. I speak for myself as a member of Rhode Island's Italian American community, and I speak for the truth. It's important for people to understand that not all Italian Americans idolize Columbus, nor do we wish to continue identifying with and exalting a genocidal white supremacist. The majority of Italian American immigrants came to America hundreds of years after Columbus. They faced xenophobia, violence, and exclusion because of their immigrant status. They aligned themselves with Columbus for survival, but in discarding their immigrant truth for the narrative of a conquering colonizer and aligning themselves with whiteness to assimilate, the spiritual health of the Italian American community was damaged. And now for many Italian Americans, the narrative of the white supremacist conqueror is so embedded into their identities that any revelation of the truth of Columbus's repulsive genocidal acts causes an emotional reaction to hide the truth and continue to run from the evil that the Italian American community has whitewashed, repackaged, and embraced. I ask the committee that while you carefully consider your recommendations for the fate of the statue's relocation, that you do not feel that the needs of the Italian Americans and those of Indigenous people are opposed. The truth has the power to heal. The Italian American community can no longer base its identity on fragile lies. And if America ever hopes to raise children to not believe in the superiority of whiteness and the exaltation of conquering Indigenous peoples instead of friendship with them, we can no longer idolize Columbus. I ask that your recommendations to the Board of Parks Commissioners leave no room for interpretation in regards to only displaying the Columbus statue in full context of the horrifying atrocities he committed. And I encourage you to do so with the knowledge that in doing so, you demonstrate the highest regard for the spiritual well-being of the Italian American community. There may be some Italian Americans who beg, plead, and bully to protect their distorted history of alternative facts due to their emotional attachments and their identity crisis and being confronted with the evil they have embraced. But your duty is to the truth. Only the truth can allow Italian Americans to truly ask themselves what it really is that they should be proud of and who it is they really are. Thank you for taking my public comment.
Thank you. Micah, we have everyone's first and last name.
We do. We're capturing all of that. Stephanie's doing a great job. I'm going to allow Doug Victor to talk next. So Doug, just unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, everybody. And this is an auspicious occasion on some level. I guess I am not quite certain what deaccession means in this process. So it's difficult to really address the agenda item without fully understanding what deaccession means and the ramifications of deaccession.
You want a response to that, or you want to talk and then get a response, or?
Well, you know, I can, thank you, Chairman Rickman. Yes, I think that would be just helpful for everyone to have an answer to that question before, you know, I frame a response.
Right. So that is a word of art. Museum, National Museum Association, 60 years ago, and about 40 years ago. And then last year, created guidelines for when you can, you know, sell, give away a piece of art. And basically that's what it means. It would not be removal to another site in Providence. It would be selling it, or probably selling it because it's valuable. It also could mean donating it, but generally museums sell a piece of art, and the city would do the same. This issue has come up in the South, as you probably know, with some of the Confederate generals. And 6 or 7 have been given away to private museums, and 2 or 3 have been sold. So that is the term of art.
Thank you.
May I just add to that, Mr. Chairman, one thought, which is that the city of Providence is the curator, the steward, and caretaker for memorials, monuments, and markers. These have come into city care through a variety of means over the years, as we heard with the earlier discussion about the memorial. You can see that there may be a family who has come together to donate that to the city of Providence, and that over time, the original stewards have fallen away, as we discussed earlier. And so they become part of the care of the city of Providence. And so the responsibility for that caretaking of the collection is held by different departments, bodies, and commissions. And that is why we are using this museum term of deaccessioning, because it's really a collection that the city of Providence is responsible for.
Thank you very much. Am I still on?
Yes,
Oh,
absolutely.
I am. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. That's really helpful. Well, so my sense, being a resident of the Elmwood neighborhood for 34 years, and somebody who has voiced his concern about just having the statue and not having any contextualizing information around the statue in Columbus Square would be problematic. And we've seen how that has borne out. The hearkening to Dave Talon's comment about Gorham and the history of Reservoir Triangle, and indeed the Elmwood neighborhood, especially the lower part of the Elmwood neighborhood, that this statue really represents an aspect of a wider sense of identification within a historical context. And combined with that, the provenance of having Bertoldi as the suspected designer of the statue lends it to have value. Now, I understand that the actual value has not been yet determined, but I would say that there's an opportunity here for Providence to come into a more robust discussion about the future of this statue. I question whether this process, in all due respect, is a wide enough process to be inclusive of people who live in Providence, especially in the south side of Providence, more local to the Gorham Silver and to the original placement of the statue itself, to come into conversation about it. I think that we're all living under the legacies, as well we know, of race, power, maleness, whiteness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this could be a really good opportunity to really have a deeper and wider discussion centered around the statue, yes, but really looking at the issues around the statue. The statue was not one to uplift the hearts of men, all men, certainly it was not. The statue and Columbus, there's a very big troublesome side of this story that deserves to be told. And I would say that this statue deserves not to be deaccessioned today, but deserves to be considered to be a catalyst for a deeper, wider discussion about our history and the history of colonialism, inequity, genocide, however we want to call it, it's kind of all in there. And I would say that I would encourage an end product to identify where this statue, whether it returns to Columbus Square or not, which for me personally, I don't know what the answer is because I'm only one person. I think it takes a larger community to make this decision, and the community really deserves to be engaged and not have these decisions made for them by a small body of people, with all due respect. I would say wherever this statue ends up, I believe it should be in Providence, and I believe that there should be ample contextualization of wherever it's placed, whether it's outside or inside somewhere, that gives the narrative, that tells the story from the variety of perspectives of the voices that are coming into this conversation today, so that no voice is left out. And I feel like that could help the city to create a pathway toward a more equitable city for all people to live in. So I thank you for your time. I know I've gone over a minute, Micah, but I think this is really, really important and very dear to our hearts because of the of kind of the multiple ways that this statue serves to represent identity, and recognizing that aspects of that identity are troublesome and bothersome, and there needs to be some way to address it through the, if I might, to help to repair through giving voice and historical information in the way that the statue would be contextualized. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, Dylan, you are up next. I'm going to allow you to talk now. Just unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, thank you so much. I just found out about this hearing last night, so I don't really have prepared comments, but my name is Dylan Peacock. I live on Congress Avenue, just off Elmwood, and before the statue was removed, I could see it from my bedroom window. While my personal impulse is to support deaccession for reasons that others have already very eloquently voiced, I will just say I find Doug Victor's comments for a more broader engaged community discussion to be very compelling, and the need for contextualization. But what I want to add to the conversation, which is something that's been largely left out of this conversation and comments from people outside the neighborhood, is that removing one of the most important pieces of public art in Elmwood without commensurate investment in placemaking to remedy that loss is itself contributing to historical injustices and divestment that our city has perpetuated for 90 years now. If you look at photos from the late 19th century when the statue was installed, this was a beautiful, green, peaceful, tranquil public place and a focal point when driving down Elmwood Avenue and a gateway of sorts for two neighborhoods. Continual decisions made by both the city and state through RIDOT have accumulated into this square, turning into a loud, polluted, and ugly place. And so I beg your recommendation to tie the removal of the statue, if that's to happen, to the city making significant investment to rectify the damage that has been done to Elmwood Avenue over the past century, including traffic calming and reduction, the amount of noise on Elmwood Avenue, and the thick soot that builds up on my house and in my lungs is horrifying. Making safety improvements. I only bought a car a few years ago, and before that, I frequently used the bus stop at Columbus Square. And especially at night, it was so dangerous crossing Elmwood Avenue, getting there with people going sometimes, 60 miles an hour down the street. And also, especially more greenery and increased tree canopy. It gets so hot here in the summer from all of the asphalt around my house. It's like an oven when I open my windows. So just tying that to just overall, like we need trees and all this. And I'll wrap that up. But please tie the statue removal to reinvestment in the community. Don't just sell it and have the city pocket the money. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lou Hines, I'm going to allow you to talk. Just unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Lou Hines. I'm also a resident homeowner of the Elmwood neighborhood. I live on Ontario Street, a block from the statue. I was there when the statue was taken down. I just want to say, like, what an amazing community, neighborhood, joyful day that was, all together on the sidewalk watching the statue come down. And I have other things to say, but I just want to share that, like, I know my neighbors, and I heard people speak earlier about the neighborhood and through like being a, leading a neighborhood association, but just like living in the neighborhood and being on the sidewalk and talking to people. Some people said, some people think this is a little thing. This is such a big thing for us. And a young girl of color that was standing next to me when it finally was hoisted out, she said, sorry, I'm getting emotional, but she said, this is the best day of my life. That she could like see that this kind of change could happen. So I just don't think there's any way that that statue can come back into our neighborhood. I mean, people are talking about how it's a divestment for our neighborhood to have it removed. But think about like what the visuality, regardless of the symbolism of Columbus himself, but the symbolism, what a detriment the symbolism of having police presence. Someone spoke about cameras, but there was, stockade wall, plywood, and cruisers, right? Just parked there, protecting that statue. So what is that symbolism that we have, City of Providence police funded to protect this monument that, symbolizes parts of our history that are white supremacist. And, I also should say that I teach at the Rhode Island School of Design. I teach sculpture and spatial dynamics, politics of space and place and bodies and objects. And, contextualizing the sculpture, those are interesting conversations. I think that it's great that what's on the table right now is removal and deaccession, and, fully deaccessioning it, because the recontextualization will probably reinscribe. And it's really important to, like, in this moment of like a massive nationwide civil rights movement, that's where we are right now, to like have space for new voice. And the other thing that has been said is, this idea of, historical context, but it's present, right? Like it's now, to the impact of the sculpture, its legacy. It's not just in the past, like what it meant in the past, and we need to understand what it meant in the past. It affects people, now, daily. And so the present context, I think, is important to bear in mind. And, when in talking about the historical context and like it being an opportunity to talk about, a catalyst for conversations about colonialism and genocide and bringing more voices to the table, I think those voices have spoken, the marginalized voices have spoken in terms of how they feel about the statue, just in the fact that the dominant sort of structure has to protect it so much for it to be there. That we have to have the police, the number of police that were there that night to protect it. I think it's pretty clear that there's a massive feeling of it not wanting to be there. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's what I am here in support of deaccession and removal as a Elmwood resident and as a artist, and yeah, having done some research in the realm of this sculpture.
Thank you very, very much.
Steve, I'm going to allow you to talk. Just unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Steve Alquist with Uprise Rhode Island. I just wanted to add some context here about Gorham Silver, because I think they're being accorded too much respect in this conversation. RISD helped to spread this new Gospel of Gorham with their display of the beautiful tableware that the company produced, but the true legacy of Gorham Silver is not just the silverware they produced for the rich or the statue they gifted to the community. It's the environmental poisoning of the neighborhood and of Mashpong Pond, right? And I think when we talk about Gorham Silver, we want to laud them and talk about how important they were to industrialization or to employment or to people who came here to work. And I think that's all quite fine. But reading from the web, for all of the 19th century and most of the 20th century, there were few restrictions on companies' use of potentially harmful materials. At Gorham, workers regularly use cleaners with PCBs, solvents, heavy metals such as lead and other contaminants. And this stuff is all still there. It's in the pond, it's in the land. We built a high school. Alvarez High School is built on top of a former brownfield. And in order to deal with the emissions from that brownfield, we have special air filters on the top of that high school, right? This is how we treat that neighborhood. This is how we think about these things. So I think it's important to get some context here about Gorham and to understand what they really are. Long after the statue is gone, long after we're all dead, that pond will still be a polluted nightmare, and we won't be able to swim there. We won't be able to drink the water. That used to supply drinking water to people. People used to be able to enjoy that area. Now it's just a industrial wasteland. And that's really all I have to say.
Thank you very much.
Oops, sorry, Steve, I didn't mean to cut you off. Matthew Lawrence, I'm going to allow you to talk. Just unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just think that a lot of the points I wanted to make have already been brought up, especially by Joey and Lou, so I don't want to be too repetitive. I am a third generation Italian American who has lived on Federal Hill for the last 9 years. And the one thing about this conversation, not today, but in general, that I keep hearing is people suggesting that the statue be moved over here. I just want it to be known, the residents of Federal Hill don't want that. The business owners maybe do, the residents are not interested. It is not, we're not a dumping ground for Italian American oddities, which I think at this point is what the statue kind of is. And I think the other argument that keeps coming up is that, you know, history, even bad history, needs to be preserved. But the reality is that Christopher Columbus, the concept, is not going away with the removal of the statue. Nobody's going to forget his name. Nobody's going to forget what he did. That just doesn't, that's not possible. Yeah, that's about all I had to say. I try to keep it to a minute.
Thank you very much.
If anybody else would like to speak in the public comment portion, oh, here we go. Chris, Corey, I'm going to allow you to talk. Please unmute yourself.
Hey, this is Chris. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Similar to even just Matthew who just spoke, I just saw this meeting was happening in Dan McGowan's daily email. Thought I'd hop in. So I'm glad that it's here. I'm glad to see a lot of the faces of people on the screen that I know in some capacity. But I too, a lot of what I was going to say has been said. So my wife and I are residents of Elmwood, just a block or so away from the statue. And yeah, there were just beautiful points that were made by a variety of people here. And I just want to come on and just stand as another white man in opposition to the statue and I guess agreement for its removal. And as someone who is continuing to try to gain more awareness of my own blind spots and who's married to a white woman and raising 2 white boys, this is a moment. Right. And that was, I mean, even Lou, I don't know you, but your point of that young girl of color who said, this is the best day of my life, when that statue came down, like this is that moment. Right. And so, it's so important for how are we teaching future generations? And for my kids, raising 2 white men, right? Will I continue to propagate those myths of the past and all of that, or will I stand up with other brothers and sisters and people of color in our neighborhood and say, no, like we are evolving in our understanding as people and saying, for all the reasons that have been mentioned here, the statue is not the right representation of especially the neighborhood that it is in now, right? And I appreciate the archivist going through the history of kind of the changing of the neighborhood and all of the actual history of the statue and things like that. But yeah, the neighborhood has changed significantly, and there's a lot of unfortunate history behind that too. But I do appreciate Doug's perspectives as well, and of having a more robust conversation. I think a part of that is happening here. You've heard from a lot of people who do live in the neighborhood, right? And there are people who have the time and have the bandwidth to, I'm working, I work at Johnson & Wales. I'm stepping away from my job today to hop in here, but like, so many people in this neighborhood do not have that luxury to be able to step away and to have a conversation about a statue, right? Like they're just trying to survive. The median income, as I was pointed out by the archivist, is in like the 30,000s, right? So below the average median income of the whole city of Providence. So I agree that there should be more robust discussion. I also just wonder how different it would be from even this conversation, which I think is a good one. I agree with the points of, if we're going to do something of beautifying the park and trying to understand more about the noise on Elmwood Avenue and having a place. I do actually appreciate the benches that were put in there for people and all of that. There was some effort of that done recently. So I think some of those elements have been good. But yeah, I just want to stand with some of the other neighbors who are here. I really appreciate Steve Alquist coming in to talk about the environmental poisoning of the pond. That is, I hadn't heard that part raised, and I think is a great counterpoint to, are we going to elevate and venerate Gorham for doing all these things? And so I stand with those neighbors who are voicing their opposition to the statue and for its removal and for that robust dialogue. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Tim, I am capturing your note here. Oh, Stephanie's doing it actually. Perfect. Thank you. All right. And Shauna, you are up next. I'm going to allow you to talk. Please unmute yourself.
Hi. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. And actually, thank you to this committee for listening to us. I know you have to let us speak, but I appreciate that you seem to actually be listening to us. Unfortunately, that's rare enough to comment on. My name is Shauna Kurland. I live on Lenox Ave. I have lived in between Elmwood and Broad in this part of the South Side for most of the last 30 years. My children, my 3 children were born and raised in this neighborhood. And it makes me sick that for so long, if they wanted to walk to Walgreens, get their snacks, they had to walk by that statue. The reason it makes me so sick is because for them, that meant, my children are Dominican, and for them, that meant walking by the statue of representation of the man who started the process and was directly personally involved in raping and killing and enslaving their people, their ancestors. And for them to have to walk by and get used to it is just a disgusting thing. I think the other thing to note that some folks have mentioned, the police presence is just further an example of how the history of Columbus continues to this day against our community. I remember one night when, there was some noise about maybe there's going to be an activity tonight to take it down. And, I was hopeful of seeing that happen and went out there and saw not just a couple of squad cars out there, but upwards of, there had to be at least, it was dozens of officers with their dogs. I crossed the street, which is my right to do, to see what they were all doing, gathered outside of Subways. I mean, Dunkin' Donuts had been closed from there for too long, so I don't know what they were doing there. But and Major Verdi himself, the second in command, telling me, okay, just go over there, and pointing across the street that I couldn't stand on a sidewalk in my own neighborhood because they were so worried about the statue. And I had to tell them, no, thank you. I'll stand on the sidewalks in my neighborhood. Thank you very much. That's what that statue means to them. Is it's so important that they don't care about our constitutional rights. They don't care about a neighborhood being able to live in freedom and peace, and be able to just enjoy our community. I think one of the things that then goes to that awful history, when you go to the Dominican Republic, and years ago, shortly after it had been built, the Faro de Colon, a humongous lighthouse. So while so much of the country does not have electricity, there is a big lighthouse built to him that actually, at the urging of the Catholic Church, apparently, the Holy Roman Vatican, whatever, that shone an enormous, like the bat signal in the shape of a cross across. So there was electricity for that, but not for the people that needed to keep their food cold, or to try to have a little bit of a fan. And that's the same thing transnationally from there to here that travels with people to the immigration, celebrating that same garbage. So to me, I think the best answer, what to do with that, melt it down, make it into something useful. If you can't do that, then get a little bit of historical perspective, the legacy that Columbus left. You could chop up its hands in a tribute to King Leopold of Belgium, what he did to the workers, the people he abused in what's now the Congo. All kinds of things. You can honor Italians by, oh gosh, Sacco and Vanzetti. Let's have a beautiful statue to them. Antonio Gramsci, so many wonderful Italian people that we could recognize. We could put a statue here recognizing people who have given in so much to our community that I can't even begin to name them. You could recognize the actual heritage of the Cascayan Island of Mama Tingo, who led revolutions of peasant women fighting against the oppressor that Columbus left in place. Toussaint, Louverture, you could recognize so many actual heroes from that island, from those communities. So finally, just to close up, and it's with a special tribute to the man who taught me so much about this and who represented this community for so long and so well, Miguel Luna. He would have loved to see that statue coming down. And it makes me sick that people who profess to be his friends speak out in favor of it, want to keep it in our community. And even to the extent of one of the newspaper articles a few years ago, before the latest controversy broke, where this person from Ward 8 tried to claim that people in Elmwood and Ward 9 didn't want it either, or wanted it to stay, because no, we don't, for so many good reasons that people have mentioned. And I thank the committee for listening and doing what needs to be done.
Thank you.
And Nancy, I'm going to allow you to talk. Please unmute yourself.
Sorry, I raised my hand accidentally. I'm not trying to talk.
Very well. And I will not make you.
Don't we have a $5 penalty for that?
If anybody else would like to speak, please raise your hand.
We asked one more time just to be sure.
All right.
Um,
Oh, we got
Joey.
more. Joey.
Would like to say something else?
Yeah, I did just want to add, I do have a concern about whether or not the statue will be sold to a private collector. My concern is that some, millionaire Italian will buy it and then gift it to Federal Hill or something like that. And so that's just something that I have a concern about. I think that it's a hate symbol. I think that a lot of concern should be taken if it's going to be sold to a private collection. It isn't just a random kind of irrelevant piece of art. It's, one that is very highly charged emotionally. And I think, at least for the Italian American community, this is not going to help kind of the identity crisis and the kind of continuation of embracing the white supremacist history and narrative if it's just allowed to be sold and then the control is given up. Other people have mentioned, it's very important that the community come together, and I think the community has spoken. I think if you look at all the people who have signed the petition and just really how everyone in the neighborhood and the community, I was there when they took the statue down, people were emotional, people were happy. I think that this almost is an insult to those people who have worked so hard to have the statue taken down, just to give it to a private collector who can display it however they want on private property and just kind of continue this narrative on their own now outside of any type of authority. So I just wanted to add that in after our conversation.
Let me share with Micah, do we have other people who are going to speak?
Does not look like it.
Okay, let me share that all commemorative works that go in public spaces have to be authorized by the city, generally by the Parks Department. So, just to answer that in general, people can't put things in public parks without going through a process. And now they have to go through this process. So that should give you some level of comfort, not just about Columbus, but about everybody, everything. If there are no more public comments, we will move to the members of the committee, the special committee.
Mr. Chairman, if I
I
could.
have a,
Oh, sorry.
go ahead, Stephanie, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, just to close out the public comment, just to let members of the committee know that we have received emails to our city addresses over the past week. They came after the posting to the Secretary of State. And they are part of what I would call a larger body of correspondence that we have received from community members over the years. So I just wanted to summarize the points, many of which we've heard in the public comment today, but I just wanted to provide a quick summary of what we've heard in some of those correspondence. Many of them speak to Christopher Columbus and his legacy. And as we've heard today, that is both historical, social, cultural, environmental, broadly speaking. Also, Columbus's attachment to the Columbian Exhibition, as we heard Caleb speak about, that was the origination of this statue, and that certainly has come up in much of the correspondence. There has been conversation about Gorham's role in Providence and Elmwood's development. Again, much of what we've heard today is repeated in these emails. Considerations for it as an art historical object. So that has come up. And then the relationship between the generations of neighbors and the neighborhood association who donated it to the city of Providence, as well as the current stewards of that neighborhood association. So I just wanted to note that before we got into the conversation that there had been additional comment. I also received an email from Councilman Taylor, which I would like to read to you for the record, if that's appropriate at this point.
Yes, please do.
Okay. Unfortunately, Councilman Taylor had to work today and was not able to join us, but submitted an email to myself, and copied on it was Caleb. He had a couple of requests, as I know the Columbus statue is coming up. First, he would like to have the statue appraised by a professional appraiser to see what's true, what its true value is. Then, once that is done, they will have more questions. He hopes that before any decision is made, that the residents of Ward 8 would be able to have a say on whether it should stay or go. He knows that there are many people from outside Ward 8 that have positive or negative opinions, but it was gifted to the city by the Gorham family and installed in Ward 8 many years ago. He thinks it is only fair that the residents of Ward 8 have a say one way or another. Then he had a request about additional meetings about the Columbus statue and the time of those meetings. And just to let folks of the committee know, I did correspond with him in return to let him know that we would be passing on a recommendation to the Board of Parks Commissioners. And Superintendent Nilsson also followed up to let him know that there would be a process that the Board of Parks Commission would also enter into around this deliberation. So this is one of many processes. I just want to remind everyone of that, and there will be additional information that will come to bear about the statue's value and other issues along the way.
So before we start our discussion, Caliph, I had an understanding, and I want to make sure this statue was purchased by, it was not a gift from the Gorham factory or family?
It's technically a gift from the Elmwood Association. So they raised the funds to purchase it from Gorham.
Correct.
So it is a gift to the city, but not from Gorham itself, from the Elmwood Association.
Right. That's my understanding. And so, when you're given a gift, it belongs to you. Okay. Who would like to start the discussion?
I would like to start the discussion.
Please
So I have lived in the community where the statue has been for almost 50 years. I would like to ask a question about the appraising process. It is a piece of art, and so it has some value. And how would we go about getting it appraised? Who would we get to have it appraised? And then we would have to then enter into discussion. What would we do with that information, correct?
Correct.
And
so I think that I'm the most involved. So let me try this. What happens with a piece of art is it is worth what someone will pay, like your house, okay? I don't care what you want for it. And it has something to do with what other houses in the neighborhood are selling for or whatever. And we can get an appraisal and they'll say because of this, and that. And of course, the sculptor and Gorham and the material and its relationship to the World's Fair, to the National Fair, that it is worth this. And then you either try to find a buyer or you send it to auction. And that determines its real value. So if someone said it's worth $1, you might get 50 cents, you might get $1, you might get $1.50. You could get $10. I'm just being simplistic using $1. I've sold about 1,000 rare books in the last year. And 1/3 of them went for more than the estimated price, 1/3 went for the estimated price, and 1/3 went for less. And in all, these are all through major auction houses in New York and Skinner and Boston. And in all cases except for one, because these were gifted to Stages of Freedom for free, I said, get what you can. And we got probably about 10% more than the suspected price across the 1,000 books. And a couple of them, we got 50% less. And I'm giving you a long answer because we can get, and by we, I'm probably talking about the Parks Department, getting a formal appraisal, but this is the only such statue like this in the world. This is not a Mercedes 1965 car in which there's still 700 in the world, and we know what the one sold for last week. So I think this is valuable. That's my long answer to you, that this has got to be worth, and I'm not going to say out loud, because you say things, then 3 weeks later, someone says you're either a genius or a clown. This is worth some money. It's valuable.
But if I could just, on the process side of things, where I appreciate that the value should be a consideration as the decision ultimately is made what to do with the Christopher Columbus statue. I just want to remind folks that the scope of your work is to determine the social and cultural merit of the Christopher Columbus statue, and that the rubric that we have provided really can be a guide for this, should be a guide for this discussion, so that we remain connected to the important questions that we need to ask about the value and contribution of this statue to our local community and the public realm.
April?
I think also I want to discuss the idea of the value of conversation and the cause of harm, right? And so when we talk about the polarizing nature of the statue, I know in my own family, it's been a polarizing object. And my grandmother would curse at it every time she saw it because of the implication of who Christopher Columbus was as an individual. It's also really interesting in the historic realm that my uncle was the person who signed to say that it had some historic preservation reference. And so just to even see that was really curious, just for my own edification. But and not just the harm to the person, but to the harm that it causes to the community. Strangers would come into the community and cause for police vigilance. And that's problematic on a lot of levels, particularly in a community that is over-policed. So when we think about the social and cultural implication, I think that that has to be a consideration. The person who spoke, Shauna Curlin, discussed in something that is in real time and real reference to circumstances that happen in this community. And if that's just the statue, keeping it safe from people from outside of the community trying to destroy it. And I think ultimately that's the piece of this, that people would come into the community to try and destroy it. And I don't necessarily think it's just because it's on Elmwood Avenue. I think if it were in a museum that would happen. I think that if it is in someone's private collection, that would happen. And I think that goes back to this idea of a polarizing figure causing harm, and not because it's a statue, but in the imagination of people. Right. And so that's definitely something that has to be considered when you think about what happens to it. I feel like the discussion, we can talk about it all we want, but the fact of the matter is that it causes harm in a lot of different ways. And so when you start talking about the social cultural importance, that has to be something that we reference, think about, and make a decision towards. Not necessarily just that it's an expensive piece of art.
Okay. Can I remind all of us, and if the public is still with us, this discussion about Columbus has been going on, as far as I can remember, for about 25 years. And Columbus Day every year, it peaks its head a little higher. But this is not a new discussion. And of course, with Plymouth Plantations and Plymouth Rock, it's been going on for about 35 years, and it reached us. The whole Gorham being a polluter discussion is 12 or 15 years old, And there have been some real discussions about that. I just want to share that with the public, that this discussion did not start publicly today. This discussion has been around, and we've had 3 or 4 huge events. The biggest one, of course, being the one in which Mr. Christopher Columbus got removed. So anyway, I just want to remind people there has been a great deal of discussion about this. We're not rushing to judgment. Who else would like to join the conversation?
I had a few different things I wanted to say, but one quick thing. It occurred to me listening to the public comments that, you know, regardless of what people wanted to do with this particular work, it seems like there's, you know, a hunger, there's a desire for some kind of work in the neighborhood, in the community, that would be inclusive, that would be unifying, that would mean something to the community. And for some people, apparently, that the Columbus statue has served that purpose, at least in the past, and for others not. But there's some need for some kind of unifying work that would represent the community. And I think people alluded to the long history with the Gorham manufacturing plant in both positive and negative ways. And I know it's not our role today to really think about what would replace the Columbus statue if it's deaccessioned, but it just seemed to me that there was actually a pretty you know, there was a shared view here that the community is looking for something that would be inclusive and that would represent the community and mean something to the whole community. And maybe there's a way to you know, look at Gorham and recognize the positive and legacies of the Gorham relationship with the community around it. But it doesn't seem to me like there's much of a future for the Columbus statue on that front. That it, you know, hearing the public comment today, it's clear that if the community is seeking this kind of inclusive and unifying work, the Columbus statue, you know, is definitely not it. And there may be other opportunities there to explore for what could replace it. I have a completely unrelated point to that I was going to make, but I'll leave it in case anybody else wants to jump in at this point.
Are you sure?
Well, in case anybody else wanted to say anything on that, I mean, the only thing I wanted to bring up is just something else about the 1893 fair that hasn't been raised yet as a point of historical context, because I think, you know, I think Caleb's report did this very well. I think the other recommendation report that we received did this extremely well too. But I do, maybe this is as an American historian, I wanted to mention that the 1893 fair was also where the American Historical Association annual meeting was held that year, which normally isn't very important, but that year, Frederick Jackson Turner delivered the address, and he delivered his Turner thesis, his frontier thesis on American history. And you know, for generations of American historians, you know, we've been trained and learned the frontier thesis. And you know, this AHA convention was held in the White City at the Chicago Fair. The White City was the shining city on the hill. It was the model city that America wanted to show the rest of the world, and the rest of the world was to admire what America had built on the shores of Lake Michigan, if, you know, they were allowed entry at all. And I think this was in Caleb's report, that entry to the White City, of course, was restricted to white Americans on all but one day. And I think, you know, that just bears repeating, right? I think it's very important to note the original setting, the original purpose for which the statue was designed. I think that's significant. And it's within that White City then that Frederick Jackson Turner delivered his address to the white men of the American Historical Association about the significance of the frontier in American history. And in that address, he speaks of the American mind and how that American mind has derived from the frontier experience. And he uses words like the acuteness and the inquisitiveness, the practical inventive turn of mind, the restless nervous energy, the dominant individualism that works for good and for evil, the buoyancy and exuberance which comes with freedom. These are the traits of the frontier, the traits called out elsewhere because of the existence of the frontier. Since the days when the fleet of Columbus sailed into the waters of the New World, America has been another name for opportunity. And I think it's probably obvious to all of us that this was intended for that audience of white men in the white city. This was a description of the European experience in America. And as we know, for too many others, the words freedom and opportunity that Jackson Turner uses here did not apply historically. And Turner gave this address at this very key moment in American history in 1893. For one thing, the South had been nearly completely redeemed, that is returned through extraordinary violence to the one-party white rule. And Native Americans have been cheated or defeated across the continent. The continent was conquered. The frontier was officially closed as of the 1890 census, according to the US Census Bureau. But as Jackson Turner noted, as Teddy Roosevelt noted, and others at that time noted, expansion and conquest were central to the American character. And so we don't see an end to this expansion and conquest. Instead, we see the beginning of American imperialism. And the continental frontier is closed, but new frontiers are being opened at that moment across the sea. And so our Columbus, the Columbus of 1893 that we're considering today, represented this imagined and celebrated European American character described by Frederick Jackson Turner, whose restless, nervous energy drove this manifest destiny, drove this westward expansion from Columbus, on through American history. But it's important, right? Because this is not history. And this was not meant to open any kind of dialogue about history or conversation. It's a celebration of one particular perspective that was designed to be exclusive, not inclusive in any way. And it's a perspective that fit the mood of much of white America in the 1890s. And Columbus, that statue that was made in 1893 was designed as an icon to this cause of expansion, of conquest, of imperialism, an icon for that particular moment in our history. And listening to these comments today, I really, I didn't think this before, and I really don't think this now. I don't think we're in that historical moment of the 1890s anymore, right? And the question I think before us is our moment in time, is our community holding different values today? And do we have a different vision for the future than the vision that was put forward in 1893? So that is what I wanted to say about that historical context. Again, I think, it was covered, but I wanted to just add that element of it.
So luckily, everyone on this commission and the ex officio members understand this. We're very lucky. I'm just reading Field's biography on Aesop Hopkins, and you just cringe that someone could write that, who has a degree from Harvard. Exclusionary, slavery is handled in 2 lines, I'm sorry, I was not telling the truth, 2 lines. And that's the nation in which we find ourselves. And this, of course, is what goes on right through the 1970s. So, I thank you, Eric, very much for crystallizing this. May we hear from others?
I have something to add to the conversation. First, I would like to thank everyone who spoke up during community comment for their eloquent and heartfelt comments. And I also want to express my agreement with April's comment and Eric's also, and add a little bit to the context that Eric was building around this particular moment when the monument was established. I have a quote from Professor Alonzo Williams' inaugural speech when dedicating this monument. And I thought, in addition to sort of building off, he actually mentions, references the speech by Frederick Jackson Turner in saying that America is indeed another name for opportunity. But he goes further to say, and I quote, "Moreover, the ethnic character of a people was never more suitably adapted to its physical environment and to its political mission than that of the dominant race in the New World. That grand struggle for supremacy in the beginning was the first crucial test in our history. Then and there was decided the fate of this republic." So I think that also sort of encapsulates just how this monument was meant to function in the place where it was put. And I think that it's our responsibility to think not only about in terms of whether to deaccession and remove the monument, but also what happens to it, as April was saying, after that. I think that part of our conversation should be not allowing it to return into public space and being responsible about where and in what context it's presented, if any, in the future.
Okay. Marco, are you going to weigh in at this point?
No, I have no comments.
Okay. So, Caleb, have we missed anything?
No, I think it's pretty well covered. And I guess just adding to the point about Alonzo Williams, he was just find my notes here real quick. He was a Brown professor from 1876 to 1901, and he taught classes in modern languages. In 1892, became the professor of Germanic languages and literature. And you can find his information in the briefing, in the footnote, if you want to go into further detail. And there is actually a original pamphlet for the original ceremony, in which I believe Alonzo might be fully quoted in that with his oration. That was also included in the pamphlet as well. So there is a lot of notes in the footnotes. So if anyone from the general public or on the board wants to take a look, I highly recommend checking it out. And Dr. Christensen's comments were spectacular. I didn't really have a whole lot of room to focus on that, but that was a great point that needed to be addressed. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add one final thought here from the perspective of ACT, which is that, this conversation that we're having in Providence is part of a national conversation. We are not the only city who has a Christopher Columbus statue in its collection and now needs to figure out what to do with it. And so I am grateful to all of the members of the public who spoke up today, and to all of you for really thinking about this very closely. One of the correspondence that was provided outside of the official process came from Loren Spears, who's the director of the Tamaqua Museum. And she had forwarded to me in June a statement from the National Congress of American Indians that I just wanted to read into the record now, because I think it presents a perspective that we haven't heard much of today, and I think is an important part of the discussion. So this is from a press release, and it says, the National Congress of American Indians, the largest and most representative American Indian and Alaska Native organization in the country, does not acknowledge Christopher Columbus as a hero. To Indigenous peoples, he was the opposite. And this is a quote, "Out of timbers for the Santa Maria, Columbus built a fort on Hispaniola, the first European military base in the Western Hemisphere. He took Indian prisoners and put them aboard his 2 remaining ships. He got into a fight with Indians who refused to trade as many blows and arrows as he and his men wanted. 2 were run through with swords and bled to death. Then the Nina and the Pinta set sail. When the weather turned cold, the Indian prisoners began to die. In the year 1495, they went on a great slave raid, rounded up 1,500 Arawak men, women, and children, put them in pens guarded by Spaniards and dogs, then picked the 500 best specimens to load onto ships. Of those 500, 200 died en route. The rest arrived alive in Spain and were put up for sale. And that's from Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. The statement goes on to say, this growing movement across the country to rid our shared spaces of symbols that represent hate, genocide, and bigotry illustrates that it is past time for all cities to stand on the right side of history moving forward. And that's NCAI President Fawn Sharp. NCAI also strongly supports the recent actions taken by United States citizens and the international community calling for proper law enforcement reforms and the recognition of basic human rights for the African American community and all communities of color. We are humbled that these voices are including Indian countries' perspectives. NCAI encourages local governments and their citizens to seek mutual understandings of their diverse perspectives and to develop peaceful solutions that are mindful of all human beings and our rich, distinct, and shared histories. Together, we can build the tomorrow of our children deserve to lead. So I just wanted to enter that into the record because I thought it was an important consideration for this group.
Wonderful, more than wonderful. Are we ready for a recommendation, or is there a need for further discussion? So I hope I can, am I still, everyone can still hear me? So Eric, are you? I'm still waiting. I know this is a complicated matter, but I think we are ready to make a recommendation.
I'm sorry, were you asking me specifically something there? Or?
Well, somebody's got to do it. I'm interested in, I think that Councilman Taylor's, I would like for an appraisal. We need to indicate to the Parks Department that this statue has monetary value. I don't know how much more we need to say. There have been people who've suggested we just melt it down and be done with it. And because of the sculptor, because of the value of it, because it is a fabulous piece of art, seriously. That should, I'm not sure that should be anyone's recommendation. And you're never sure when people are being serious and when they're just commenting. But destruction of public property is one of the reasons we're here, to be candid. There are people who wanted to destroy it and still do. And that shouldn't happen. So I heard something very interesting today I hadn't thought about before, and that is, who is it sold to? If it's the, if it's sent away, who can buy it if someone wants to buy it? And in the Southern Confederacy discussion, almost everybody says anybody can buy it. So the city can get $500,000 for those statues in Richmond, probably going to get more than that. They're stunning. So, I'm not sure I should, all I'm saying is that I think we should honor the councilman's request. And I believe it, I believe it as well, that the there should be an appraisal process to ascertain its value. And then, I think this resolution is going to have several parts. And I think it doesn't matter what it's worth. If it's worth, if it's worth nothing, if we should find out that this is a $5,000 statue, then you might make one decision. If we find out that it is worth a great deal more, then you might make another decision. Now, I'm trying to figure out if how far we should go in recommendation, because I've heard separately from today from 12, 14 people in the neighborhood that there should be a replaced item. And I don't know what that is. I thought the simplest thing is a great fountain, but maybe there should be a statue. Maybe, so that's a separate question for the Parks Department. I don't know if we want to recommend that or not, because it goes a few steps beyond Christopher Columbus.
We have received, sorry.
Well, let me make this final comment. And I've thought this too, that, they ought to be greening up that spot. Now, we weren't shy just, 2 hours ago when we were talking about the World War I hero, that there should be some enhancement, probably greenery. Again, I don't want to, we should stay in our lane, but we can be expansive about the lane, and the Parks Department doesn't have to take our recommendation in full. I think we're just guiding them. What were you saying, Stephanie?
Eric can speak and then I'll comment.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just had a question on those lines that, it would be interesting if this committee could consider proposals in the future for what to do with that space, right? And I think there's a lot of concern about the lack of investment in the community. And it seems to me, if anything, the Columbus statue has probably been an impediment to considering investment in the community. And so I wonder if it's within the scope of this committee to invite, or maybe invite the Parks Department to invite proposals in the future, rather than us considering on a motion right now what to do with the space, but to invite that kind of process somehow in the future. Is that within the scope of this committee?
So
I have a question.
We have an application for new commemorations, and we have received proposals for this site, but it seemed preemptive to have a discussion about those proposals without first having a decision about the fate of the statue that is there. So I'm happy to both let you know that yes, there is an application that is open and it's on a rolling basis that we will review those items, and that we do already have about 20, I think, in the queue for our next meeting, hopefully.
Yeah. And are these just ideas, or is anything substantial?
Very subjective question, Chairman.
Yeah. I think I have a question. I have a question. We have a question in front of us, right? And so you're looking for an answer to that question, right? And it is about an object. Do we want it to be deassessed? And do we want it to return, right? Is that not the question in front of us?
Yes, but there's a third option, and that is that we would recommend they move it someplace else. I don't think we're going to do that, but there are at least 3 options.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will make a recommendation. That the statue has been deassessed and that we ask the Parks Department to have it appraised. I feel like a lot of the other conversation that's happening afterwards, we're not there yet. We have to decide what we're going to do with this object.
Okay. Does anyone want to add any language? It is that it be sold and that they find out what it's worth before they sell it.
We can add that language. That you can make that a part of my recommendation.
Well, that's what an appraisal would say. And are you suggesting we leave the rest of it alone? And improving the park and all of that, leave it alone for another time? Because,
Yes.
okay, there's no
Yes.
question that people are going to come back and say, now let's do this.
Exactly.
If Christopher's gone, let's do this.
So that recommendation was motion?
Go ahead, Eric.
I'm sorry. I just
No,
wanted to clarify that recommendation was a motion, or was this?
Yes, it was a motion.
Yes, it is. It is. If you want to talk to the motioner and ask her to add or subtract, feel free. But it is a motion.
Marco,
So
did you have
let's have discussion on the motion. Discussion on the motion.
I know that we've decided to sort of stay in our lane in regards to what happens next, but I do want to sort of re-elevate Dylan's concern from the community comment that we consider tying the deaccession to investment, reinvestment in the community. So I guess what I'm asking is, if we are recommending that it's deassessed and that it's sold after being appraised, is there a way that we can also make a recommendation that whatever funds are received from that sale can go back into revitalizing the community?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is also in the same genre of my question. I'm, and thank you, Stephanie Fortunato, for like sort of recalibrating us around this, this question of like selling and what we're here to make recommendations on. Having said that, I guess I can't say it any better than what Becky said. I'm really more interested in, if it is sold for whatever value it maybe have, like what happens to the way those funds move in terms of how they are reinvested in benefit the community. Is that, what Becky said.
So, there are several ways to do this. One is that funds be reinvested in that park. And the other, of course, would be that they create a fund to improve, and have to work on the language, but improve, public spaces and parks. Maybe with that one being given priority. This might be, if this is worth a lot of money, then this is a moment to do something good, really good. Create an extra fund. I mean, who knows? If it's not worth a lot of money, then, they can do less. So I don't know what the language is. I think most of this is going to depend on the value of the statue. But we can be firm in recommending that it be resourced into the community for park improvements. And then, I'd leave it up to someone else to say whether park improvements, the Christopher Columbus site and beyond, or the Christopher Columbus site.
May I just say something, Mr. Chairman, about city ordinances? I believe by city ordinance, if it is sold, that the dollars would have to go back into city parks. We can clarify this as a point afterwards, but that is my understanding of the city ordinance as it's written.
Okay.
So then I have a question about that, Stephanie. So can we then say as a committee that we would want special focus on where the statue stood and then make it general and can we be specific as that in that way?
I mean, so to be clear again, you are making a non-binding recommendation about this. So yes, I believe that you could do that. We just want to make sure that we're in compliance with local, state, and federal regulations about what happens. And that is for the cities, for us to work out, but yes.
All right. So what are you about to do, April?
So that's a whole bunch of information. All I know is that I would like for the statue to not return. I would like for the statue to be appraised. I would like for what happened to those funds. We have to determine that. I think that these are still conversations that we need to have, and we're not there yet. But I would like to recommend that if we do sell the statue, that we put special emphasis on where the statue stood, to maybe make it green, to make it a real park, instead of this kind of brick thing, like a median that's in the community.
Yeah.
That's what I'd like to see.
Okay, so that's your recommendation. And it basically has 3 parts. Any other discussion?
I just want to also note that Superintendent Nilsson is in the outer Zoom room. What do we call this? I just forgot the word for it, but she is here if we wanted to have her speak, or we could, obviously this will be an ongoing conversation, so I'm sure the subject of future conversation as well.
Right.
I would like to open a conversation about what will happen to, as I mentioned before, what will happen to the monument afterwards. Can we recommend that, for instance, can we recommend that whoever it goes to or whoever it's sold to will have to be someone, a place where it can be properly contextualized and not, like, I know that it can't be on a city street, but just a place, an institution, a museum where it can be properly contextualized.
Yeah. So we could do that, but guess what? Are we again, I want to be delicate here. Are we interested in funds to improve the neighborhood? Or are we interested in how others in Italy, I'm just pulling that out of my hat. Some nobleman in Sicily buys it and we put these restrictions on it. And again, you're noble and I'll be glad to go along with it, but I'm just worried. I'm not trying to get you to,
That is not a part of my recommendation. If you're asking me to put that, I am not. That is not anything that I would recommend.
Becky, I think it may be a step too far.
Okay.
Because, do you know what I really envision if we're lucky? This goes to an auction house and an Italian nobleman buys it and puts it in their 16-acre garden.
Right.
And no one ever sees it except their friends. And when I go to Rome, I'm going to ask, can I come see how it looks? But I'm worried that you're right, but I'm just worried it's putting too many requirements in place and it may stop the sale.
Okay.
If I could, I think we all share Becky's concern here, and I'm just thinking, whatever we recommend, it is just a recommendation, and so I wonder if we do want to try to qualify it just a little bit to say, if this statue is ever to be displayed publicly again in the city, then we would strongly encourage that there be, contextualization, which is absent. Maybe it's too dangerous to put that in there because we just don't want that to be an option. But it might be, I'm just worried it might be considered an option anyway, regardless of what we as a committee recommend. We say remove it, but then there's a compromise, position that's put forward somewhere else. And so they decide to move it instead of remove it. Do we want to have that kind of backup language that says, well, if you do that, it's got to be contextualized?
I'll be honest. I'm not interested in contextualization. I need to be really clear about that. I am not interested in trying people to put Christopher Columbus in the backdrop of what is expanded history. I'm not interested in that. What would be nice is that if we could just talk about what Lauren Spears put out and what Howard Zinn published. Do you know what I'm saying? Like at some point, contextualization is not helpful from the harm that the polarizing figure did and continues to do, right? And I want to be really clear about that, right? That doesn't erase it. It is what it is. And putting it in context against other history doesn't make that helpful, right? Because harm has been done and you can't do anything with that harm, right? And I want to be clear about that. I just don't want to, I don't want to see it in my neighborhood. How about that?
So April, a lot of people agree with you and agree that these statues, a friend of mine was on the commission in Richmond, and the majority of people wanted the statues destroyed. They didn't want anything. And they didn't get destroyed because they're too valuable to destroy. You know, you don't destroy $5 million worth of statues. And so the city fought back. And that's what's going to happen with Mr. Columbus, that he may be very valuable. And I'm not sure how we should, again, I don't want to overstate my opinion. Mine is he should be out of the city. Eric, I'm not sure anybody's going to pay us big bucks to buy him and then put him in a public, it wouldn't be a public place, but put him someplace in the restaurant window and we all walk by and see it. Because I don't know what kind of protection that restaurant has that the city can't have, and the city can't have it because it can't have 7 police officers out there all the time and 50 the week before Columbus Day. So I don't think any restaurateur can do that here. And again, I don't know what anybody can do and what they can't do. So we have a resolution. I'm not being argumentative. I'm just trying to move us forward. Becky, what do you think? We have a resolution that doesn't contain the language that you were thinking about.
Yes, I think I just want to, a couple of things. First, I want to clarify that I absolutely agree with what you're saying, April. I think that my concern rests more in not wanting to create a situation, like if we're talking about, you know, getting an appraisal and we're talking about selling, potentially selling the monument, that we're not just, you know, putting off something that we've deemed to be harmful and creating a space where someone else can put it into another space where it will be able to cause more harm. And so I think that my suggestion in proper contextualization lies in that, like wanting, if someone else is to get it, wanting to ensure that it's in a space where the harm can be, I mean, we can't undo the harm that Christopher Columbus did, but the way we talk about it, the way we tell stories about it, can minimize perpetuating that harm or creating systems where that harm is perpetuated. With that said, I would like to second your motion, and that's it.
Okay. Unless there's is there any additional discussion? We have a motion on the table. So do we need to just, I'm going to ask if we're all in favor. All in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone not in favor, say no. The motion has carried. Micah, if we need to, I think the language was clear to me. If there's some need for further clarification, I'd be glad to work with you, but I think you probably have it.
I think I got it, but I will make sure before sending anything over to Parks that you all review.
Okay. And make sure you spell Christopher's name correctly. It's the little things. Anyone else on this matter before we continue? I think it was a wonderful discussion, by the way. Now, I have a problem. I'm supposed to be someplace on Zoom in about 17 minutes, which I have to go to. So I'm just telling you that. I want to apologize.
I promise my ACT report will take 1 minute.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'm just going to reiterate that that we do have about 20 proposals for the Reservoir Triangle Columbus Square site. So once we've kind of pushed this proposal that we're recommending through the Board of Parks Commissioners, we will be able to really have a robust call for input from the community. And you know, folks can start inputting their ideas now. I'm just going to repost the link to all panelists and attendees for the Commemorative Works site. Someone in the comments asked us to reread the recommendation. So I'm going to just reread the recommendation for Bob from what April originally said. So there's 3 parts to the recommendation. We are recommending that the statue not be returned to Columbus Square, that it be appraised for its value, and that contingently, if it is sold, that the funds used from it go to parks improvement generally, but with a specific focus on that site. So that is the meat and potatoes of the recommendation. And then I do want to say that the materials from this meeting will be archived on the Art Culture Tourism website and on YouTube, so that other people can be brought into this dialogue and check back in with how we've deliberated. You know, we want to make this as transparent and inclusive as possible. And yeah, you all know how to find me, so good work today.
And Caliph, can you make use of this meeting?
Yes. In what regards?
I don't know.
What, the archived? Of course,
Yeah,
it's archived upstairs.
Yeah. So is there other business that must come before us? And are we thinking of another meeting this spring? Or are we going to wait till September, or what are we going to do?
So the applications are open and can be submitted at any time. The thought was that this body would meet twice a year, about 6 months apart, to give time for applications to be received, vetted, researched appropriately. In terms of this particular conversation about Christopher Columbus, you know, the Board of Parks Commissioner will need to meet before we could move that forward in this group. But I imagine it'll probably be about 6 months from now that we'll come together again.
Okay. So can we tentatively agree on September so that everybody can kind of know not to go to Paris, and and we might meet in public? What do you think, April? Oh, well.
It's shaky. I can keep hope, bringing hope eternal, but I'm not certain. I'm not certain.
Okay, you know, we can meet in my yard. I have a big yard, and we could do that.
I'd love that. There needs to be adult beverages.
We might run afoul of you know, the ethics commissions here, y'all, but it's a beautiful.
Probably not if you bring your own and we don't do it till after the meeting.
Exactly.
We should adjourn this meeting though before we continue that part of it.
Yeah. Is there anyone with final comment before we adjourn? So may I ask that someone recommend that we adjourn?
I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
I was going to say, normally you ask the youngest member or the oldest, so, and then the oldest doesn't speak up. So we'll assume you're the youngest. I thank you. There is a motion that the meeting be adjourned. All in favor?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Hello, aye.
I thank you all and have a fabulous afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank you.
you,
everyone.
Stephanie. Thank you, Micah.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Goodbye.